writers and doctors and readers. Thank you for being here. This is a presentation of the Writer's Voice in the Billings Public Library, and thank you for coming. Poet Charles Flynn, photographer Barbara Michelman, and poet Tammy Holland are here to read from works, including the latest book launch and book tour for Charles and Barbara's book on the Benediction of the Wind. Tammy Holland is the author of 3 poetry collections, What Does Not Return, When We Wake in the Night, and A Breath in Every Room. She's a graduate of the University of Montana and Bennington College, and she served as Montana's Poet Laureate from 2013 to 2015, and has received every possible award, including the Governor's Humanities Award, an Artist Innovation Award from the Montana Arts Council, among other awards for her work. Tammy taught English at Montana State University in Billings and currently serves as Dean of Liberal Arts and Social Science, which I would say is a warning. If you're really good at something, be careful, they may make you a dean. But we're happy to have her in Billings. Author Charles Finn is a former editor of this wonderful literary and fine arts magazine, High Desert Journal, and is the author of Wild Delicate Seconds, 29 Wildlife Encounters. His essays, poems, and nonfictions have been published in numerous journals, magazines, and newspapers all through the West. He currently lives in Havre, Montana, with his wife, Joyce, who is joining us tonight. Thank you for coming down. Photographer Barbara Michelman started her career in Hollywood as one of the very first women working in film lighting. Her photographic work has been widely exhibited with work in public and private collections, and her recent series of aftermath of fires in the West is called Fire on Every Mountain. And the book was awarded Best of Photography at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival in California. And Barbara currently lives in Missoula, Montana. So, Tammy, I think you're going to start things off. Please welcome Tammy Holland.
So, hello. Good to see you. And I'm just going to read 3 poems. I want to say that this book of Charles and Barbara's is a beauty, which I see most of you have bought it, so you probably will know soon if you don't already. But it is just, it speaks to the urgency of, entering into the wildlands around us and paying attention. And I really appreciate it. So, since Charles' work is about, being outside, I thought I would read similar themed material. So this is called Flicker Builds a Nest. You know flickers, yeah, the woodpeckers, right? They make lots of noise in your neighborhoods. They like living around people, and this poem sort of explains why. Flicker builds a nest beneath a branch in the dying willow to keep rain from her door. Ear to bark, I hear her rough out walls, a pile of wood chips at my feet. By June, I assume a nest of children. Later, her crazy calls echo in the kitchen, and I go out to see a cat climbing. Whenever she calls, I walk the fence with a long stick and poke until the cat retreats. One day she calls when a sharp-shinned hawk guts a robin in the elm. Feathers on grass show where it plucked him from the air. Torn between one and the other, I choose to chase the hawk away. Days later, she urges her single child to follow tree to tree and then up the street until I no longer hear what they say. This is called Self-Portrait with Visitation. Skin of my arm in a sheen of sweat, a landing for flies and mosquitoes. I admire their shine, their brilliant nattering, and welcome a butterfly, orange flitting and returning, settling into the shade of my camera. It may be disappointed, I am not a flower, my only nectar salt, but it stays, its wings languid until I disrupt the scene to walk further and take a turn to the river where I come upon a colony of orange, camouflaged in gravel and breeze, wings pulsing, so the surface is never still. So these are, I guess, hiking poems, and, I was gonna read another one like that. Yeah, it comes at the end of this manuscript. So hang on a second. And this one is called We Are All God's Poems. And some of you, so you know the author Sean Ray, and he issued this challenge to a lot of people to write a poem called We Are All God's Poems. And then he wants to do an anthology called We Are All God's Poems. So it took me forever. We were supposed to take like 2 weeks, and I took months and months, and I still need to send him a revision. But anyway, I got it finally. And so here it is. We are all God's poems. Each day I hike into wildness edging the city. Trails wind and converge, human paths built on deer trails built on human paths, ant trails through sage and sand that allowed them to make their own small city last spring. Gnarled and twisted pines, some dead, mark the way, their roots surrounded by stone. Tree bodies choose to lie down or lean into each other. There is a hawthorn, its ripe berries hanging in dark clusters, a pine where a single magpie watches. I love each step, the influx, the way boulders split into uneven pieces where a juniper or ponderosa seeds itself on top. And when I return home, the mountain ash, the last to let go its leaves this November, even on a cloudy day, seems to glow with light from within. So thank you.
Take it away.
Can you hear this? There we go. Thank you so much, Tammy, for that. Those are all new, unpublished? Well, okay, yeah, but they're not in a collection yet. They're not in a book yet. Well, those were wonderful. So, and thank you for the invitation to accept to come out and read. I'm going to read I'm going to read a few and let you enjoy Barbara's photographs as I read these poems. And then Barbara and I will have a little talk and discussion and tell you more about the book. And then I'll finish with reading a few more. The first will be the title poem, On a Benediction of Wind. On a benediction of wind, they watched the cranes leave, and their feelings reached out to each other like the minds of migratory birds communing. Above them, the sky abundant would stop at nothing. He turned to her, and she said, "Jettison everything." Oh, how little time we have, and what will be left of us when we leave? A house on a hill, some wood smoke? Don't laugh, he said. Life is a rare vase carried by a child, as she laughed, tossing his most trusted fears like pennies into the sea. He watched the tide recede, leaving her ankles, her toes. Wash the axle grease of now from your hands, she said. Take hold. Together we shall strike out for the northernmost territories of love. He watched the tide come back in. Like the cranes, he asked, like the wild geese? Yes. Back alleys. It was her habit to walk the back alleys at noon. She felt a kindred spirit with the drooping telephone wires and sagging back porches, the dogs on steel chains sleeping with one eye open. She liked, too, the brown leaves blown into decaying piles and the muddy tire tracks leading to somewhere else. They gave her hope. There were days she stepped carefully around the puddles, and days she stomped right on through, never giving a thought to metaphors or new shoes. It was the honesty of peeling paint that attracted her, the screen doors hanging askew, the dented garbage cans. Most days she kicked a tin can as she walked, left foot, right foot, hands in pockets drawing her jacket tighter. Simple pleasures, that's what the days were about, the sound of a rusted gate swinging in the wind. Church was. Church was a shallow river like glass, and the night's high-born clouds wrapped around their mountains like lovers. It was the mountains disrobing, taking off their clouds, unashamed. Church was the frostbit meadow, the outstretched arms of the pines incensing the air, the high priest of moose who came to drink with heads submerged, to raise them like fountains. Hand in hand they took communion of the huckleberries collected, while all around them the gospel of birdsong swelled, and the sermon of growing light rang down upon them. God was no angry old man in the sky. This much was obvious, and no church, a house built by human hands. Barbara, do you want to tell them how this book came to be?
Well, Charles and I knew one another from, can you hear me? Oh, there it is. Charles and I knew one another from Stevensville, and some friends of ours we were at an outdoor dinner, I think it was September, and we'd been fiddling around with stuff, and a couple of our friends said, you guys should do a book together. And it took us forever, but we did finally do a book together. And we've been working on, I've always been interested in trying to make not a show and tell of picture and word, but something more. And with Charles's work, I started working on, I did, the first iterations were these tin types. I was working on an alternative process where I would print on this film, and then I'd coat this aluminum, because I was always looking for inexpensive ways to like do what I do because it's so bloody expensive, and I found a source of inexpensive aluminum. So I coated this stuff, and you pull it off and you get one shot at it. And so that was the first thing that we did, were these tin types, which were shown in Missoula, and from that the book came along, because part of it is that our aesthetic, our sensibility is so similar, his in words and mine in images. It just seemed to seemed to be so right, and beyond anything, this is the most amazing collaboration I have ever had. So that's the book.
This one in particular, Barbara showed me this photo at some point, and I forget exactly when. And I for whatever reason, I mean, obviously, because it's a beautiful photograph, I was drawn right to it. And it launched me into the beginnings of this poem. So this is one of, there's probably a half a dozen in the books that I wrote from her photographs that spurred me to write. Oftentimes, so the other ones in the book would be where I would write a poem or and send it to Barbara, and that would, she'd find something that paired well with it. At one point a few years ago, when we finally, as Barbara said, look, we got to do this book someday. We've been talking about it for years and years, and she flew up from California, and I was living in Federal Way, Washington at the time. And we sat down over the course of a long weekend and probably quite a bit of wine, put this book together and got the manuscript to a place we thought we could start to shop it around. And so when we did that, obviously we researched potential publishers, but I did reach out to one and just said, oh, I kind of have this idea for this photo poetry book, working with Barbara, yada, yada, yada. And I said, look, would you like me to send you just a handful of samples, just to give you a taste of what it is, and if you kind of like it, we'll send you the whole thing. And the response I got back was like, hell no. It was like, if your poems need some photographs, then I want nothing to do with it. And that put me, back on my heels a little bit. And I was surprised. She didn't quite understand, and maybe probably because I didn't explain well enough, the idea behind it, meaning that is not supposed to be a support poem for the photo, and neither is the photograph a support for the poem, but there's they dovetail in their own way, which is why I like to read sometimes without any explanation, because this is how you will experience the book. You won't have the backstory to everything, but you can make your own interpretations about, why these two might or might not go together.
And as a visual artist, I was always interested, because we actually laid out the whole book. We had a whole layout that we had done. And a lot of what finally came back was a lot of what we originally had thought about, because what I was always interested in was the idea that it would be a single canvas, that it all went together visually. And that was, I thought, very important, because that's how I see. And I will say I was really pleased after all of the iterations that this book has gone through, that I feel like they gave us so much of what we had originally imagined, and so I'm grateful to the publisher for that.
So I'll read another few samples and let you view them at the same time. This is one I haven't read yet. Conspires. When the pot lid of night slides into place, when the frogs shout their one-word love, me, 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 when the moon and the stars get down to business, feigning serenity, and the nighthawks make good on their name, you and I will be in bed, tangled as we were meant to be, the improbable geese on the other side of the ceiling, flying south against all odds. It is not enough to love the world. You must dive in. When I was young, I used to go out at night and howl at the moon, just for practice, just for kicks, and just in case it came to that. Look around, the moonlight taught me. Everything conspires to love. Classical music. There is music, and then there is music. The slap of a beaver tail, the screech of a hawk, the slow thunder of tree root pushing through soil. There is a toothless mastication of children in the old, my heartbeat, the stars. Oh, you can keep your rock and roll. Just leave me the symphonies of butterflies, dawn whispering hope. Leave me the proposals of wildflowers, the confessions of snow. Yes, give me all the harmonies. Take me to the mountaintops. Give me the breathing of stones. Now this is a little bit of a longer one. And I had thought of doing a whole series of, or doing a book with a whole series of memoir of such and such. I was going to try to do a raven, an oak tree, I think a river, and I forgot what the fourth one was. And I never got around to it. It was requiring a whole lot of research and to learn the lifespan of an oak tree. And I finally just kind of gave up. And the only one I really got anywhere with was just this 400 or 500 words of Memoir of a Raven. And it has, I won't tell you which ones, but some of the favorite lines that I've ever written are in this one. The wind is high again today, a long, steady pulse out of the south. From my perch to the end of the valley, I am able to look out on everything I know, the green spires of firs and the thick trunks of the cedars, the beetle-killed pines and their long needles brooming the wind, my brothers inscribing the wind with their dark arabesques. As for me, I push off with barely a wing beat, following the river downstream, dragging my shadow over the green avenue of its water, its cobbles of stones and cylinders of fish. Let it be known I am partial to the jazz songs of coyotes and the drum solos of grouse, that I can hear on the coldest nights the sound of a nut turning over in a hungry squirrel's mind. I was born in Yellowstone in what you call the Year of the Fires, and was present for the reintroduction of wolves. There will be willows again, I said that day, and beaver. In celebration, I flew over the whole toy box that is Yellowstone, its clockwork geysers and Kodachrome hot pools, the hard-thinking bears and the slow-motion bison. I was reminded once again of the quick silver minds of the elk and the grace of all things. For the record, I have been a thief and beggar. I have a weakness for shiny things and a penchant for showing off. One of my favorite things to do is fly to the park in Livingston where the old men play chess and listen to the radio. Perhaps you've seen me rooting for the Black Queen. Or hanging upside down from a telephone wire. Look, Mom, 1 foot. It always draws a crowd. But I ramble. Time is running out, and I admit I wasted my affliction. Yet there is nothing like drinking out of a fresh grizzly print to confirm that your life is on the right track. So I remind you that the days come and go, but mostly they go. It's the minutes you must collect. The armature of your life will drag you along, even as the plowshare of the days drags its one long furrow into forever. My advice is to keep pace. Don't let up. As confused as you might be in life, as conflicted, in death there is no doubt. Find an elk carcass and look inside. No confusion there. I love the world for this, for the certainty that exists in us all. I must go now. All this talking has made me hoarse. I have a squirrel in my throat, we say. So I will leave you with a few final thoughts, a few breadcrumbs of wisdom from a poor, wind-tossed raven. Humility, please, you must practice harder. And happiness, dilate your life with joy. Meanwhile, take solace in the indifference of the world. It is its most abiding construction. Lastly, and this you must remember, write it down if you have to. The loons, they aren't laughing. Okay. Barbara, do you want to talk a little bit about your process? Because we've gone out together on walks, And we both discussed that that just doesn't work well. You having someone else around, it's difficult for you to concentrate and shoot. And it's a little bit the same with me.
Well, what I first wanted to say is that in working with Charles's words, you know, I always get an emotional hit from them. And what I try to do with the images is find something that seems to be, have that sensibility, because in the end, what I want to do is find a way to communicate with what I see, bring it back, because not everybody gets to go where I go and say, hey, isn't this something to behold? And that's how I feel with Charles's words. So my process is the best times are when I am lost, and when I'm out photographing, I'm not there. I disappear. You know, it's like any instrument. You have to make friends with it enough to know what it will do and how it works, so that I don't have to think about it. And so when I see it, I can capture it. So that is basically my process. And the best times are when I've suddenly found myself, you know, down on the dirt, shooting up that way, and I don't know how I got there.
Actually, she lost her cell phone that way when we were visiting oh God, where were we? The Chief Joseph site.
Bear paw, right.
Yeah, in the Bear Paws. And we drove all the way home, and she was like, where's my phone? And so we had to drive all the way back south of, not Shelby, I forget where we were. Chinook, yeah. And there it was on the ground, where she had been like lying on the ground shooting up. So yeah, I'll read a few more, and then we're going to, of course, open this up for questions. One thing to mention is this is the first time I've experimented trying to write prose poems. And I created a pair of characters. They're not based on anyone I know, but there's a he and she that are throughout the whole book. And I found it just a convenient way to get away from I, using the first person the whole time. So this is my attempts at prose poetry. This is called Success. It was the time of the hummingbirds, the lilacs, of the sky going nowhere behind the old sawmill. There was a small talk of rain on the metal roof, and an odor of creosote and hot steel rising from the tracks. They would meet in the afternoons, she combing her hair with her fingers, he drawing circles in the dirt with a stick. Already they were old prose, idling, passing time back and forth like a bottle. It was easy to see they would one day marry, grow old together, learn to turn the seconds between lightning and thunder into forever. The first time they met, he asked her to tell him a story, and she pointed to a broken window and made the shape of a heart. It was the very next day that she found him 2 stories up on a homemade ladder, replacing the glass. Giant heart. For her birthday, he built her a giant heart. He made it out of old car parts, rusted tin cans, barbed wire, and stained glass. He made it 10 feet tall, 8 feet wide, painted it gypsy red. When the day came, he led her to it blindfolded, down the dirt path where the daylilies grew and skunk cabbage flowered. By then, he had added sticks and stones, old bones, and French doors opening out. There was a nesting box for bluebirds and a needle for sutures. When he took the blindfold off, she settled against his shoulder, little hammers of joy beating in her breast. I gave it wings, he said, just like the real thing. She walked slowly around it, removing faded strips of wallpaper. When she tugged the starter cord, it chugged to life. It runs on homeopathic doses of hope, he said, pointing to a thimble as he knelt and handed her the keys. and this one is for my wife. Each year, on the anniversary of our wedding celebration, I do not bring my wife chocolates, flour, or a card. I bring her sand to let run through our fingers, our names tied to the leg of a beautiful bird we let go. I bring dirt from our garden and a single acorn of oak. I bring her my heart on a plate with a small knife and fork. I bring her all my shoes so I may never leave, and throw out all my clothes so she may see me as I am. Lastly, I bring her an apple Eve gave to Adam as we fall into bed, laughing and tangled, and when we come back from that mystery, I bring her a glass of all her tears, collected and saved from that year, which I drink till they're gone. Do you want to talk about that photo and the previous one, Giant Heart?
Well, this photo was actually taken in Death Valley. What I look for is a whole composition. And if there's not an interesting sky, then there's really not a lot in terms of what I see and what I want to say. So I drove down in the middle of this crazy sandstorm. I was so I couldn't even see the road, but when I got there, the park had emptied out. There was nobody in Death Valley. And the next day, there were these amazing clouds, which the opening piece on A Benediction of Wind was shot at the same time. It was that same day. There was like the way the light came through. And this was later in the day where it started to clear. So if you look at that, yeah, that was shot in Death Valley. And it's not something you would ordinarily think that that's how Death Valley would be, but so, you know, people often ask me, well, how do you get those shots? And this thing is, you just wait. You know, I go out, I run outside and look at what the sky is doing. And then there's a whole process that goes on with all of these, because these are all originally color and they're shot in what they call, there's a lot of technical stuff that goes along with it. They're raw files, and then I have to take them once I go into my studio and do these conversions and tweak them so I can get the black and white the way I used to be able to get black and white in film, because I love shooting black and white. I think it's much less representational, and I think much more evocative, and also is, I think, demands more. You know, color photographs are like, you look at the thing and it's all right there. It doesn't really ask as much of the viewer, and I hope that my work also asks everybody to participate and bring their own sensibility into what it is that you're looking at. The other shot, A Giant Heart, which we went round and round with the publisher on this shot because we loved it, and it was actually a little tighter shot, but I backed it out, and they didn't want to use this shot. They said it didn't look like the rest of the book. But we loved it because we felt it went so well with what the piece was about, and they finally allowed us to use the shot. So this was actually taken, most of what I was shooting in that series that I did on the aftermaths of the fires, and I approached what I saw because it was all of this landscape and these homes, and everything was just decimated. And I approached it as if I were shooting landscape. So same thing, I waited until the skies were right and there were things going on, because I felt like what I was representing, or what I was representing is not the right word, but what I was standing in was what has happened, and this was our new landscape. It was one of the harder series I ever took on, to stand there in the middle of all of this ash and destruction. And occasionally I would get in on these small details, which are the story of somebody's life that's just gone. And so this was part of that series. So.
Yeah, so I'll just finish up with a couple more poems, and then, of course, we're going to open it up to questions. And this is a poem which Barbara has requested me to read at other readings, and I had to include it this afternoon. It's called Celebration Day. I believe there will come a day when even our greatest sadnesses will break ranks, wipe their tears away, and march like patriots into the eternal dark closet of the sea. It will be a time of great rejoicing, the alpine of our troubles laid low, a day to sing hymns and write songs about, a day to say prayers over the corpse of our worries, and like love for our children, we'll be unable to shoehorn one more feeling in. Excuse me. As for our sufferings, they have been like olives in the gin of our days. Truly, I will miss them, but we must leave them. Leave them the way the stars leave the heavens, leaves leave their branches, the way geese just now are leaving the water, all at once, completely, in a great honking celebration of the journey to come. This will be the final poem. The one and only list poem that I have ever written. And it's called a partial list because the list could obviously go on and on and on and on. A partial list of things I would like to be. I would like to be a sponge in the rain, wind in a tunnel, the prow of a ship, an atom being smashed. I would like to be air in a lung, cement hardening, bread rising. I would like to be sunlight and electricity and gasoline. I would like to be champagne. I would like to be a match struck, a splinter coming out, a hay barn full of hay, a tractor on the last day of harvest. I would like to be a book being read, a hand held, a beer drunk, a baseball on its way to a home run. I would like to be the cloud on a cloudless, I would like to be the sky on a cloudless afternoon. I would like to be a regret let go in a sports car taking a curve, a first kiss, a hug, and a birthday. I would like to be a homegrown tomato, a night out on the town. I would like to be a Christmas tree. I would like to be a couch on Sunday, a paycheck on Friday, good news in the mail, a child's first step. Should have been over here. A drum being beaten, a bed being made. I would like to be a wedding dress. I would like to be a log on fire, a swimming pool in summer, a toboggan in winter, the moon howled at by wolves. I would like to be gravity and photosynthesis. I would like to be a cure for cancer, for AIDS, for the common cold and heartache. I would like to be a favorite color, an old pair of jeans, a hot bath, and a college diploma. I would like to be a dance move. I would like to be a dovetailed joint, a finish line, a path through the woods, a promise kept, a hole dug, a sold-out show, a free parking space, a day off. I would like to be a haircut and a new pair of shoes. I would like to be an afternoon nap, a traffic light turned green, a stereo turned up, a stamp licked, a puddle jumped, a stone skipped, an eraser clapped. I would like to be dessert, congratulations, and a good laugh. Finally, I would like to be a seed of almost any kind, and I would like to be the calm before the storm and the storm. Thank you so much. If I were to edit this poem, the one line I would change, I would like to be a dance move. It was pointed out that it should be, I would like to be one of my wife's dance moves because I can't dance. Any questions, comments?
The constraint of a book tells you, but I have no idea
I
of the
shoot
actual
with
size.
a very high megapixel camera. These could be 40 by 60. So
Wow.
yeah. They're big. I do large format pictures.
Did you have a show where Charles read? Actual photo show?
They were small, though. I think when we did those tintypes, they were small. So that was something that we talked about, that, like actually taking some of the work and doing them with some large photos.
Charles, I would argue that your last book was prose poetry. So I'm curious how you see this differently, because those pieces were poetic too. I mean, what's different about this?
Yeah, it's funny because people often came after Delicate Seconds came out, and they come up and go, "Oh, I love your poetry," and I was like, "Well," and I'd say, "Thank you very much," and I'd be thinking, "Well, they're essays. Those I structured as personal, nonfiction, true account essays. So I don't get to lie in those. Whereas in the poet, you can make up all sorts of things and this persona and this and that. So you don't have to stick to the actual experience that launched the poem. You can take it in whatever direction that poem wants to go. So I think that's the main difference between the two.
Did you have more, or did you cut stuff, or was this all?
You mean in the slideshow?
No.
Yeah.
In the book, did you guys have to cut anything?
We changed things. There were things that some went out and some others came in. I think it was more like that.
Yeah, these were simply the strongest poems I had at the time that sort of fit this. I didn't really. We took one out that was in the original manuscript because I just thought, nah, it's just not quite up to the rest of them.
Out of the egg. I would be so fascinated to know which photographs sort of inspired a poem, or if there was a poem that inspired the photograph. I mean, sometimes I sense that you see parallels with an existing photograph of a poem. They fit together. But were there cases where it was one or the other?
I would say more, more time it was Charles's poems, and then I'd go through my battery of photographs and kind of think about them and play with them and try it. And it's very intuitive, and I would go, this one. And I can't even tell you exactly why, except that, as I said, I was looking for some kind of emotional sense of what we were both working on. For all of the technical stuff, in the end, it's still a very intuitive process. And some of them are clearly more obvious, the one with the raven, that just seemed natural. And some others, it was like, this one just seems to want to be with that. It's like a jazz riff. That's how it seemed to me that we were playing off of one another. And there are some where, it was clear that you wrote off of my image, like the back alleys. Yeah.
Yeah, this is another one that I saw that photograph, and this is the poem that came from it. So this was photograph first, poem second. And then I think, not the Raven, but again, Church was
This one. Not
is the other one I
this
mentioned.
one. Yeah.
Those are two examples, and there's only maybe half a dozen in the whole book that were that way.
I think so.
Most of them, it was I'd send Barbara the poem first.